is really two things. Primarily, it is an exercise in learning how to do a report out. What is a report out? Report out is a systematic way of summarizing an empirical study. And it's a skill that you need to develop. However, it's pretty repetitious. So I'm assuming that all of you have, do I need to say something again?
Summarizing a what kind of study did you just say?
It's a systematic way of summarizing an empirical study. You know what makes a study empirical? Empirical is where it's based upon data bits and evidence, which does not make it, it does not necessarily have to be quantitative. Qualitative studies are also empirical. If you do an observational study, you have observational data. If you do an interview study, you have your transcripts and your tapes. You know, the interviews, that's data. Those are data. So as long as it is analyzing data, and by the way, it could also be mixed methods, partly quantitative, partly qualitative. As long as you're analyzing data, it's an empirical study. And I guess we don't have time to go into the long version of that, do we? We could go into the much longer version. Maybe at another time. Although, it's hard to resist this one. Do you all know what, well, I can justify this is important enough. Do you all know what parsimony is? Parsimony. You've heard of parsimony. Does everybody know what it is? Parsimony is the principle that all other things being equal always go with the simpler explanation. The simpler theory, the simpler explanation, the simpler description. Don't use a more complicated explanation if a simpler explanation applies. That's the principle of parsimony. Now, there's some irony involved in parsimony. Speaking of irony, another little aside. Does anybody have a good quick definition of irony? No looking up, just off the top of your head.
Mm-hmm.
Any English teachers that have one off the top of your head? You've got your mouth full. And obviously yours is like at least 30 seconds away. Good, aren't they?
They're wonderful. They make me happy. Well, I don't have like a textbook definition like the one that I just gave, but it's when you expect one thing and basically another thing happens. What everyone would assume is going to happen doesn't happen. The expectation does not. So
Pretty good. I have one that's almost like a textbook explanation that I've developed over the years. And so this is one that you might like, especially if you're an English teacher. Irony is a situation in which meaning loops back upon itself with a surprising or unexpected twist, which will work for middle school kids or high school kids. Irony is a situation in which meaning loops back upon itself with a surprising or unexpected twist. Now, you teach what, middle school kids? That'll work for them.
I have one on I have like a really good textbook definition with situational irony and
Yeah,
all
so,
of the.
yeah.
Yeah, I just broke
Yeah.
that one down Friday actually. But this is actually really good. I like that.
All right, so there's some irony involved in this. Parsimony is one of the principles for one of the scientific principles for judging the quality of theory. Now, there are several, but that's one of them. Now, the origins of parsimony. Anybody in here ever heard of Occam's razor?
You mentioned it before.
Do you remember what it was, or just that I mentioned it? Yeah. Occam spelled O-C-C-A-M, O-C-H-A-M, O-C-K, O-C-K-H-A-M, various spellings. Anyway, Occam's razor is the following statement, verbatim. Do not multiply entities beyond necessity. That's Occam's razor. Now, do you see how from that you could get that the simpler explanation is always better? Do not multiply entities beyond necessity. Occam was about a 10th or 11th century Scottish religious philosopher. He was arguing and lost a religious debate. Anybody know the religious debate he was arguing? The Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost versus the Father and the Son. Which do you think Occam was arguing for?
Son.
The Father and the Son. He was saying the Holy Ghost we didn't really need. It's this unnecessary entity. He lost the debate. The irony, of course, is that in losing this religious debate, his principle was bequeathed to the opposite side, science, to become one of the canons of judging scientific theory. Do you think that's interesting? Irony? Oh, remember earlier we were talking a little bit about smart versus smart, really smart? How much? Had a math teacher. I was teaching sociology of education at the University of Louisville. We had 2 math teachers in this class. One had been a math major at Duke University. Really good. Enough so that his professors wanted him to get a PhD in math. And that's high praise. That's not an easy thing. He resisted them, and they thought he was a tremendous waste of talent because he wanted to be a high school math teacher so that he could go back to Shelby County, just east of Louisville, and become football coach because he had played football, and he went back there and he was the varsity coach while he was working on his master's and simultaneously working on some classes in math. He was doing the same summer he took my class, he was taking a class in the math department called the history of math. They didn't study the history of math by reading about folks. They did the history of math by solving about 30 of the classic mathematical proofs, and they weren't a classic mathematical proof unless they had stumped the mathematicians at the time for at least 50 to 100 years. And then, of course, hindsight, we know more math than we did back then. So their assignment for the summer was to go back and solve, do these 50 proofs or 30 proofs. So you'd have to be a pretty good mathematician to do that. So, it wasn't like, oh, well, where did Newton grow up and what was his life like? It was like, well, what were the proofs that he couldn't get and solve those? Anyway, there was another football playing coach who was an algebra geometry teacher at Trinity High School, which is one of the big boys' Catholic schools there in Louisville, which is also a perennial state champion or second to St. X in terms of football championship. So both of these are really pretty good mathematicians. The guy from Duke better than the other one, but both decent mathematicians and both high school football coaches. The one guy at Shelby was the head coach, the other guy was an assistant on a much bigger program. So anyway, as I'm talking about this, remember this is an example of really smart. The guy from Duke leans over after I told this, and the 2 of them always sat in the back, and they would usually not say anything loud enough to disturb the class, but every once in a while they would say something and be loud enough so the rest of the class could hear it. And this was one that there was about a 6-second delay, and then the entire class broke down. So the guy from Duke leans over. This is after I finished telling this about how he lost the battle and yet bequeathed his principle to science. So the guy from Duke leans over and says, "Hey, Joe, if he'd have won that debate, you'd have been teaching at Duality High."
Okay.
It's going to take longer than 6 seconds for some of you. The Trinity, Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost,
Instead of
lost,
duality, high.
would have been the duality. A little longer than 6 seconds for some of you there.
Oh, they got you.
Anyway, just to come up with that off the top of his head? No, that's smart. Could you have done it?
My daughter.
I was impressed by it. I don't know that I could have done it.
I'm not a quick thinker like that.
That's
It takes me a while.
that's my daughter. I mean, honestly, that's her all the time.
That's the way her mind thinks.
That's how she thinks all the time.
But you know who else is like that? Have you ever listened to any really good comedian? Or people like, if you go back and look at some of the tapes of Johnny Carson, or what was
Johnny
it?
Carson.
Johnny Carson, or Robin Williams, or any of the really good, if you listen to tapes of those people do that kind of stuff all the time. And there's just such an ability to take two facts, unrelated, and relate them in a way that is so jarring that makes everybody, you know, a lot of times
Stop and
there
think.
is a delay before somebody else gets it. And they do that kind of stuff all the time, which is kind of a remarkable skill. All right. Your mini lit review. You're going to do 2 report outs, because I'm assuming that if you do 2 of these report outs, you have learned the skill. Don't make me think otherwise. I'd hate to increase this to
No, 2's fine.
3 or 4.
We got it.
Okay. All right. So there's 3 parts to this
Can master it.
review. Think of public speaking. Remember the old saw, tell them what you're going to say, tell them what you said in public speaking. The first part's an introduction, then you tell them the details of your speech, and then you quickly summarize the points you made. Why do you do that in public speaking? Because in public speaking, unlike reading, they can't go back and reread it. So you have to give them, all right, set them up for what they're going to hear, tell them about it in detail, and then go back and remind them in a summary. So that kind of works. Well, we're going to do the same thing here. So you're going to have an introduction, which is going to be about 1 long paragraph to a half page. No more. Mind boggler. 1 long paragraph to a half page. I get report outs that have 1.5, 2 pages. Introductions. Let me repeat. 1 long paragraph to a half page. No more. All right. Report out number 1. First of all, is it okay if you have a how-to piece or an editorial piece or a position paper? Answer, no, no, no. The study you're reporting has to be an empirical study. How do we know it's empirical? Well, a lot of times you can tell by titles, but the quick way to tell, does it have a section called methods, and does it have a section called results or findings? If it doesn't, that doesn't mean that it isn't an empirical study, but you better look pretty carefully to make sure it is. Most studies reported in journals will have a methods section or some word similar to that, and they'll have a findings or results section. That pretty much assures, if you've got those 2 sections, that pretty much assures that it's an empirical study. All right, report out number 1, 4 paragraphs. All 4 paragraphs, in fact, reporting what that study is. Note, report out. Yours is not to reason why, yours is but to report the facts. You're not analyzing the piece, you're just reporting what the author said. You're summarizing that author's work. All right, paragraph number 1. Oh, one more thing. A report out does not summarize or discuss the lit review in the empirical study. And almost all empirical studies will have a lit review at the beginning to kind of set up, you know, what's been going on in the field before they did their study and how their study advances the field. But your report out doesn't do that. If your reader wants to read about what lit review is in the study you're reporting, let them look it up. So there really is nothing. You're reporting their purpose, their methods, their findings, their limitations, but you're not talking about their lit review. If your reader wants to know about their lit review, they can go read it themselves. All right, so paragraph number 1. Purpose. And you can do a sentence something like this. Smith and Jones, 2010, did a study on. in order to. So in one sentence, you have given author date, cited APA style, what they did, and why. Then, you expand the purpose by giving or discussing the research questions and or hypotheses. I don't believe in a lot of quotes in these, but sometimes if the research questions are sharply stated, that might be worth quoting them.
But if it was qualitative, it wouldn't have hypotheses, would it?
No, but it would certainly have research questions. Almost
Okay.
certainly would have research
So we'd
questions.
have that part of it.
Sure.
I'm trying to make sure I still remember. It's been a while since I had that course. Thank you.
Okay, paragraph number 2. By the way, you do remember that in APA, if you cite Jones and Smith, 2010, in paragraph 1, that citation does not carry over to paragraph 2, so in paragraph 2 you have to recite Jones and Smith. And if it's Jones, Smith, and Wilson, 2010, then on all subsequent citations it is Jones et al., 2010. And another mind-boggler, despite the fact that I just reminded you of that and have reminded other classes of that, and all of the APA sources in the checkoff readings you have remind you of that, I will see Jones, Smith, and Wilson, Jones, Smith, and Wilson, Jones, Smith, and Wilson at least 100 times throughout the course of that study. And only the first one is correct. All the others should have been Jones et al. I wouldn't say these, you might think I'm perseverating on APA, but after a while you get tired of reading the same mistake over and over and over and over. More perseveration. Okay. All right, paragraph number 2. Methods. Discuss the methods. Hint. Not one word of what you put into paragraph number 2 on methods should come from any part of the article that you will report on outside of the methods section. Everything in your methods paragraph should come from the methods section. So if the methods section is a page and a half long, all of your paragraphs should be about that page and a half of methods. One of the things that just, and I don't understand how people can do a paragraph on purpose, then they do a paragraph on method, and in the middle of the methods paragraph, they'll skip over and have some stuff on results, and they'll have some stuff on discussion. And meanwhile, I think the man in the moon is interesting, and they throw in everything in the kitchen sink into a paragraph on methods. The only thing in your methods paragraph is stuff about the methods that came from the methods section. You want to say that again?
Yeah,
You think that's a pet peeve of mine?
a little bit.
You're getting pretty good at reading my pet peeves already, aren't you? By the way, when you've done this a lot, you soon have a sense of what things people don't get. So I know it's kind of funny the way I do it, but I think sometimes people get that better if I emphasize that. So, all right, 3rd paragraph, results. And Sarah, I'll bet you could also almost finish this sentence. Not one word of the results comes from a section outside of the
Results.
Very good. She was listening. By the way, be careful on this. How many of you remember the TV show Dragnet? Rerun. Well, guess who only? Okay. Okay. All right. Let me quickly. This was one of the original police shows from the '60s, black and white, early '60s. Sergeant Joe Friday. And if you've never seen this, it's probably worth YouTubing 1 or 2 of these just to watch. Sergeant Joe Friday was always, it was kind of like an early version of Cold Case, wouldn't you say? He was always trying to solve some murder mystery or something that had been laid there forever, and eventually we get to Sergeant Joe Friday. And inevitably, during the course of the half-hour thing, he would go out and just start interviewing people who lived in the area, seeing if anybody had seen anything. And it was a motif of the show that sooner or later, at least one of those interviews would be an old maid. Either a widower or some old woman who lived by herself, And the stereotype was that she was lonely and that she was always watching out, and she would see everything because she was bored and didn't have anything else to do. And so, you know, he would go up and he would start interviewing, and he was a nice looking guy, and these old women were lonely, so inevitably they would just be interested in talking to him just because he's broken up a really boring day for them. And at some point, as they tried to drag the conversation on and on and on, he would always say, "Just the facts, ma'am, just the facts." And she did it with me word for word
That's
because
right.
she knew that was coming.
We used to laugh about it all the time.
Every show, at least once, he would put that in there. Every show.
We'd walk around the house saying that. When I would be long and drawn out with my mother, she'd say, "Just the facts, ma'am, just the facts."
So anyway, the point I'm trying to make here is that in your dissertation, when you're writing chapter 4, and in your report outs of an empirical piece, when you're doing the results section, just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. No interpretation. So you don't put what it means, just what the findings are. And it's very easy to do that. It's especially easy to do that in a qualitative piece. So, just the facts. All right, paragraph number 4, yes.
So we would be pretty much summarizing or quoting this person.
Well, I mean, you're probably going to be summarizing say if it's a quantitative study. Did they do t-tests, did they do correlations, multiple regression, analysis of variance? You explain what they did, you explain what the population was, how they did the sample, all of that kind of stuff. That's all method stuff. And then the results, what were the findings? And what did the table, what were the results of the tables? What did they find? If it's a qualitative piece, what were the conclusions? So, okay. Then the last paragraph is limitations. Now, this is the part that has the most judgment involved. Almost always, to get an article published, as an author, you will have to write on the limitations of your study. That is, what were its weaknesses. If you don't, you're likely to get a revise and resubmit. We like this piece, but you need to do these things to fix it, makes it better. And inevitably, if you didn't include a section on limitations, one of the things that they're going to ask you to include in your revise and resubmit is, and what were the limitations of the study? So, almost always, authors will have something on there. If they do, you should discuss that. In addition, you feel free to discuss other limitations vis-a-vis the threats to validity. The problem you have is that this assignment is due next time, and Z and Brandt are not going to do their presentation on threats to validity until after next time. So, read the U and Olin piece, because that will at least give you a quick and dirty sense of that. The U and Olin piece. U-Y-U
That's what I wanted.
and O-H-L-U-N-D. That'll at least give you a quick and dirty sense of what they're going to be talking about in more detail. For example, if it's a piece on special ed, I can almost guarantee you I know one of the limitations from the beginning. Most special eds are case studies or multi-site or multi-person case studies, so the ends are so small that, the end meaning number, that you have no way of knowing whether that generalizes to the population at large. So and they may or may not say that because that's almost obvious, but if they don't say that, you can certainly add that in addition to their discussion. All right, so now you have 4 paragraphs that have summarized this empirical study. Those 4 paragraphs done well should take you somewhere between 1.5 to 2 1/4 pages. Probably the average report out is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 pages. All right, then you do report number 2. Report out number 2. Guess what? It has 4 paragraphs, Trudy, on
The purpose of the study, the method, the results, and the limitation.
very good. Very good. The only thing that you need to do different on the second study, if you can, you should show how the second study is related to or builds on the first study. In other words, in your mini lit review, you don't want a study over here and a study over here that are so, even though they're on the same topic, they're so unconnected that there is not an immediate thing. They're both should be fairly well connected. And in fact, if you have a study that was done in 1987 and another study that was done in 1989, and they say, building upon the research of Jones and Smith in 1987, so then they're trying to further the research agenda in that area, and they even show how the second one builds on the first one. By the way, in that case, you would not do the 1890, 1889, 1989 first, and then 1987, because that's not the causal order of time. The second one builds on the first one, not the other way around. Does that make sense? All right, yes.
And when you're connecting both studies.
And you can do that with a sentence. So you can do that with one sentence right at the beginning of this.
Okay.
You got the first report out done, second report out, Jones, Smith, Beal and Adams, 2011, did another study related to the first on, they did this in order to, or something like that. So you can do it with about one sentence. So it's just an additional sentence of connection.
I mean, the purpose area?
Yes, and that's right at the beginning of the purpose paragraph.
And in going back to the limitations, we can find our own.
You can find your own if you see them, but certainly discuss any that they put there as well.
Okay.
And if, sometimes that's pretty thorough, so all you have to do is discuss what they did.
Okay.
But sometimes you want to, okay, yes, there's these, but, what about that one, and I can add that one. By the way, I mentioned regression to the mean a while ago. Does everybody know that one? The best example of regression to the mean? Sports Illustrated jinx. You've all heard that? Has everybody heard of the Sports Illustrated jinx? Oh, the Sports Illustrated jinx is that an athlete who gets his or her picture on the cover of the Sports Illustrated, which is quite a coup for an athlete, inevitably, the next year has a down year. And so it's like it's a jinx that causes them injury or decline or something. It's not a jinx, it's regression to the mean. Think about why you would get your picture on the cover of Sports Illustrated. Your most humdrum experience or a lifetime achievement? Well, if it's a lifetime achievement, guess how many times you're going to do it? Guess what's going to happen from thereafter? Regression to the mean. So that's a classic example of explaining regression to the mean. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You are done with report out number 1. Your report out number 2. You remember the intro. Tell them what you're going to say. Tell them what you're going to tell them. That's the body, 2 report outs. Then tell them what you said. That's going to be your synthesis. 5 paragraphs in your synthesis. By the way, in the Dropbox, there's a section on mini lit review, and there's 2 or 3 things in there in terms of examples and other reflections and other things. They're written, plus a couple of examples. So,
I'm confused, so there's 5 paragraphs?
5 paragraphs in the synthesis.
Oh, okay,
You've got your intro, which is going to be 1 long paragraph.
right,
Then you've got a report out number 1 with 4 paragraphs. Report out number 2 with 4 paragraphs. Remember, you've got purpose, methods, results, and limitation.
right.
So you got 2 report outs, each with 4 paragraphs. And then your synthesis, which has 5 paragraphs.
Okay.
All right, paragraph number 1 of the synthesis. Compare and contrast the 2 studies on purpose. Now, that seems like it's going to be a little bit redundant, especially given the fact that you just did these 2. But in fact, in a lit review, you might have a section that has 5 or 6 studies in it. And so at the end of that, it really does help the reader if you kind of go back and synthesize what you just did. So it's going to seem a little bit redundant here because you just did them and you're only doing 2. But in a regular lit review, it won't seem near so redundant because you'll have maybe 5 or 6 or 7 studies in that section, and it really does help the reader then to go back. Okay, now by compare and contrast, notice if your 2 studies were by Jones and Wilson and Beal and Adams, you cannot compare and contrast them without citing both Jones and Wilson and Beal and Adams. So you're going to have to cite them both and tell what each did and how the one is similar or different than the other. All right, paragraph number 2. Compare and contrast. Again, you're going to have to cite them both. Compare and contrast those 2 studies on Sarah Condiff. What would you guess?
Well, it would then be kind of following that pattern we did before, so methods.
Methods, very good. Candy, paragraph 3, compare and contrast on.
Results.
And Michelle, paragraph number 4, compare and contrast on.
Limitations.
You guys have got this down. Z, a little tougher. What do you think the last paragraph might be?
Compare and contrast on the limitation?
No, that was her. That was 1, 2, 3, and 4 were purpose, methods, results, and
Conclusion.
limitations. Huh?
Conclusion?
Conclusions, and the best way to think about that is where is the field headed? What is your sense? Now, you remember, you just read 2 studies in this field. Plus, you have some knowledge about that field, or you wouldn't have picked it. So you have these 2 studies. Remember, almost always these studies are going to have a section on recommendations for further research. That's some sense of where they think the field is going. So you got 2 studies on that, but that's already kind of incorporated into the limitation. So you got recommendations for further research plus your own knowledge of the field, and between the 3 of those, you kind of, what is your sense of where the field is headed and why? That's that 5th and concluding paragraph. And then your references.
Is that last paragraph coming more from our perspective
That's much more so than anywhere else. Everything else is just reporting out. In that last paragraph, it's reporting out what they think the field is going plus where you think the field is going. So yes, by far, that last paragraph is the most used. That's a good point, Sarah, thank you.
Okay, I'm a little confused here. So the synthesis is where we compare and contrast.
Yes,
And also, we state where we feel the
yes, that would be.
research is
So
going.
synthesis has 5 paragraphs instead of 4. The first 4 are compare and contrast on purpose, methods, results, limitations. Then the 5th one, you add that is where's the field going.
I got you.
Yes,
So if I was looking at power in nursing, I'm hung up on that. There are several studies on power. One has to do with, for example, power of the deans, and then one would be power that Florence Nightingale had, but I could not use those. It would be better if I had 2 about Florence or 2 about deans and power.
yes, yes,
Okay,
yes.
that's what I want to make
Yes,
sure.
you don't want, that's what I said, you don't want this is the topic of power in nursing. You want your report out to be on some little segment of power in nursing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the more, it's always better, folks, look up here. Remember the old proverbial, a study a mile wide and an inch deep versus a study an inch wide and a mile deep? These are always, so narrower topics, more in depth is always a better treatment. Yes, true.
In a typical dissertation, how many studies would you incorporate in your literature?
Let me speak to that by what I don't want you to do. I had a couple colleagues at U of L who were really hung up on, now these are both good scholars, but they were really hung up on having dissertations be really, 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 really supported by empirical studies. And in fact, they even developed, got through the curriculum committee, 780 and 781. 781 was basically, I don't remember what the name of it was, but it was like developing lit review. It was a fall semester. And during the course of that, you had to do 20, you had first of all to pick a topic, get it approved. And then you had to do 25 empirical report outs. And their empirical report out was even more detailed than mine. So they had subdivisions on methods. So they had methods, procedures, methods, like that. So theirs would often be almost 2.5 to 3 pages long by the time they got done with theirs. And so first semester you had 25 of those. So that guaranteed a 50 pages, and sometimes 50 to 60, just for those, without even an introduction. Second semester in the spring, it was 781, which is a continuation of that, and an additional 25 empirical report outs. So by the time you got done with that, you had 50 empirical report outs on your topic. Now, as you can imagine, sometimes those empirical, if this is your core nugget of your topic, they had already exhausted the ones that were in that, so they kept getting more and more peripheral to that, so they really built a case around that. The other side of that was, and the reason that neither Dr. Keister nor I liked that, me from up there, him from down here, we had common dislike of it together, is because then some of the students that had done that in that required lit reviews to class sequence would come to us then, and we would be their chairs, and we were trying to help these students turn 100 to 125 pages of empirical report outs into a decent lit review. And when you would read what they had written, it was like these report outs were kind of wandering through the woods, one after another. What did they do? Other than wander through the woods and give a lot of empirical reports on that topic, but they were so much that they really didn't do anything, and you lost focus with all the there. So, you need enough empirical report outs that you report the studies that are closest to yours, that are most like what yours are like, what yours are modeled on, but you don't get to the point where it loses any sense of what it means. And that means that your lit review should also include theoretical pieces. Sometimes it might even include empirical pieces to give a sense of the debates that are in the field. So I do not favor a lit review that is solely empirical studies, because I think by doing that you exclude theoretical focus, and you sometimes just wander, and you also exclude some of the debates in the field about what are the contested issues. Because some of those are debate oriented, and they're not empirical studies. And sometimes those are the ones that help give guidance and understanding to the empirical studies that you would include. One of the things we'll talk about in this class before we're done, when we're talking about the prospectus, is how to use Venn diagrams to help shape your lit review in chapter 2. So we'll spend some time on that at a later point.
Something I can do.
You like Venn diagrams?
It's like something I can do, really. Yay.
Okay. Good question, though. Thank you. Okay. I think at some point between now and when we leave, you'd like me to spend a little bit of time on what your personal 15-minute PowerPoint is going to be like, right? I know at least Z and Brant are worried about that. Is there anybody else, or are they the only two? All right. How are we on our syllabus? We have just finally finished 5 and 6.
And then scoring rubric.
Oh, critical performance on your mini lit review, as long as they're there. Take a look at page 9. These classes have to have a critical performance. This is the critical performance. So after this is done, a caution on that, this eventually will get loaded into the electronic portfolio. You've all done that before. All right, but it will not be loaded into the electronic portfolio until and without meeting these criteria. All right, so you are going to do a mini lit review. If I grade it and give it back to you with a grade on it, which means an A or a B, then you will correct it. And those will be mostly editing kinds of things. And your corrected, if I grade it and give it back to you, it goes into the electronic portfolio in the draft form that you gave me. Okay, so if you get an A or a B, that's the form that goes into the electronic portfolio. If I give it back to you without a grade, that means that you and I have engaged in a mastery process, and you're going to do at least one more draft. Okay? And so I won't give it back to you without extensive feedback and without us meeting. So you'll redo it. And assuming, for the best, that nobody gets to the third draft, that your second draft is adequate, and I grade that. That second draft that I grade, the draft that I give you a grade on is what goes into the electronic portfolio. So that means if I give it back to you, you have to take that feedback, add that in, rewrite as needed. So the original really rough draft that didn't get graded will not turn up in the, so that should guarantee that everything that makes into the electronic portfolio is B or better. Because if it's a C, I'm not gonna give you a grade, I'll give it back to you. Does that make sense? Okay, here's a kicker. You may have an aha moment on doing empirical report outs in between your first draft and your second draft. So your first draft is really, and I give it back to you with lots of feedback, and we talk about it. And somewhere during the process of talking about it and redoing, the light comes on, and all of a sudden you give me back, and I get this really glowing report out, which if I had seen it as a first draft would have been an A. However, that seems to me unfair to those who did the first draft with a B. So even if the light comes on and you give me A quality on the second draft, I will so indicate on my feedback to you and on what I put, but I will also indicate that it is a score of a 3, I think with the B on the 1 to 4 spoon, because it was second draft. Is that fair? Okay, so if the light comes on, I will certainly recognize that in my feedback to you, but it's still not possible for you to get an A as opposed to a B unless it's on first submission. Because that wouldn't be fair to somebody that got a B on the first submission and didn't get a second chance. Now, some people will say, well, if I got a B on the first submission, can I redo it? And I'm all for mastery, but I'm also for having time to go hiking with my son this summer since I'm retiring. So at some point, no. You know, there are limits. I guess, put it the other way, I guess I don't want all of you to succeed well enough to get you to an A instead of a B. So I guess in that regard, I don't totally believe in mastery.
Who looks at these electronic portfolios?
And Kate,
That's who does it. Okay, now I understand.
almost all universities, now, every university has some buy. I can't remember what it's called. We had a system we used at U of L that we bought from somebody, and it was pretty cumbersome. But ours has been developed internally, but all universities have something like that. And almost all universities now have critical performances, which are emblematic of key work in that. And it's all standards-based accreditation. And I would guess it's in nursing and public health and accounting. I mean, this is not just unique to education.
Okay, thank you.
That's SACS-like stuff as well as MK.
Steve, on the rubric, there's certain sections that say like ×3, ×2.
Yes, that means that they're weighted. So that means that the synthesis is it's weighted ×2, so it's worth 6 points. And if you look over the APA format is not weighted, so it's only worth 3 points. So APA format is worth that in itself on the bottom of the rubric on page 10. So that's 3, 2, 1.
6 points.
The quality of expression is weighted ×3, so instead of 3, 2, 1, it's 9, 6, 3.
Let me see.
And the intro is weighted 2, so it becomes 6, 4, 2.
Okay. So you've already multiplied it.
Yeah. Yeah. Does everybody see that? So I've got the rubric laid out there, but if you're going to do well on a section, quality of sources. Well, the fact that you were able to pick empirical studies, that's good, but I'm not going to give you as much credit for that as I am the fact that you really wrote it well. See what I mean? Okay. All right, any questions on that? Take-home midterms. We don't have time to do that today, but I would like for you, do you know each other well enough to get into groups? Those two are out, Aaron is in, you are in, and Joetta is in. So that would be 6 and 4, or 10, plus 2 is 12. 4 is ideal, so that would suggest to me 3 groups of 4.
We could just do this for.
Can we do that now?
It's a group midterm.
And I would like to just go ahead and write those down if we could.
No worries.
Did I see that these 4 are a
Yeah,
group?
we'll just,
Easy.
Is that by mutual acclamation and acceptance and all that?
I don't know if it.
We will talk about that next
oh, we just
time.
happen to be sitting together.
I was playing. Just
Somebody's
easy.
missing too, right? Like somebody's not here today.
Joanne, but there'll be 12 if we
But I
count
mean,
her.
there's just 4 right here. It'd be
Because
easy.
those 2 they're done with that. And that would be 4 and 2 and 3 and 1 is 4. So okay, are these 4 in?
Mhm.
All right, have the other 2 groups done? All right, first of all,
It should have happened, because yours is the last class, so it should happen before.
okay, now you know that these are on
I know, I know.
the
And that's what you're
correcting
worried
the
about.
bad survey. We'll talk about that next time, but I want to get the groups down. So this is Michelle and Candy and Sarah, both with an H. Sarah. Okay, second group. Joanne who? And? Who else, Joanne?
Natalia would be good if you let her be in my group. Sometimes you don't let her.
Okay, so Latiah is in,
As long as you behave.
and Latiah, is it L-I or L-A?
L.A.
L-A?
Yes.
TIY.
I think you're, it's sitting directly behind me.
And Jennifer?
Jennifer. True.
And
True.
so I'm guessing that that would leave Brant and Aaron and Z and Joetta. Is that correct? Okay. Good enough. So now, we aren't gonna have any wars, everybody that's grouped together can get along and all that kind of stuff? Z, are you local?
No, Owensboro.
Owensboro. You're local?
Me?
Yeah.
I'm-
You're local?
I'm-
Is Joetta local, or
No, she drives.
where's she drive?
Murray, yeah.
Okay, so, but email being such as it is, that shouldn't be that much of an issue, okay. All right. All right, when you're doing your mini lit review, you should read the sections in the Dropbox on mini lit review, the exemplars, as well as looking at this critical study. Okay. Draft dissertation prospectus. Okay, on page 11. You will see a link there. Okay? That is not the link that you are going to use. That's an informational link. That is the link that the doc program requires. Okay? That is not the link that I require. Mine is in the Dropbox. Mine is more extensive than that. Let me tell you quickly why. If you did this prospectus that is required by the thing, you can get that done in about 4 pages. And you can get it's enough that it kind of gives a description of what you're going to do, enough so that you could go to a committee member and they would read it and say, oh yeah, I'm interested in that enough, yeah, I'll work with you. So that they're not buying a pig in a poke. They at least know what you're doing. However, those 4 pages are a long, long ways from developing a full proposal. A full proposal is all of chapter 1, all of chapter 2, all of chapter 3, your references, and all your appendices, which would be all of your instruments. And that's what you need before you do a full proposal defense. and you need your full proposal defense out of the way with your committee signed off on all of that, because that's in effect the contract for then the research you're actually gonna go do before you can go to IRB for human subjects approval. On the other hand, if you do the extended prospectus that I have you do, that's gonna take you somewhere in the neighborhood of 17 to 35 pages to do that. And if you do that, that's gonna have enough detail in it that you can probably convince your committee to let you go to IRB, because you will have addressed things like instruments and variables and all that kind of stuff. Now, it takes a lot longer to do a full prospectus that's 20, 25, 30 pages long than it does to do one that's 4 pages long. On the other hand, it's a whole lot less work to do 25-page prospectus and have enough detail in it to get IRB done than it is to wait on IRB until you're done with 65 to 80 to 100 pages by the time you finish all of chapters 1, 2, and 3, plus references, plus appendices. And sometimes it is really beneficial to get the IRB approval process done while you're working on the full proposal. Sonia House, who's up in nursing, I was her committee. And she was under deadline because, like most nurses on the faculty, she came in with a master's and was working on her doctorate while she was learning to teach, developing new courses, doing committee work, and, oh, by the way, supposed to get her dissertation done and get promoted, to assistant professor, to a full professor, to an associate professor, and have enough research to do that all in the same thing. That's a demanding task. And Provost changed her deadline 3 or 4 times, from like May to end of April, to beginning of April, to mid-March, and finally to about the end of January. Meanwhile, she had originally been thinking that she was going to be under the one deadline. Fortunately for her, because she complained about this a bit at the time, she said, "Steve, can't I just do the short form and go on?" I said, "No, you need to get this done, because then you can do IRB." So with some grumbles, by the way, she's a good student, but she just wanted to get on. And so she finally finishes that, goes to IRB, gets it done. And because of that, there was some tedious coding that she could do, and some of which she had to have people do for her. And because she'd gone to IRB, she could start that. And about the time that that's happening, she did her full proposal defense mid-November, close to the end of November. And that was about the time she got the letter saying she had to be done by the end of January.
Why did they bump her up? Instead of taking her the other way, that doesn't seem very nice.
So anyway, fortunately for her, I was not teaching January term. She was not teaching January term. She didn't spend much time with family over the holidays, Christmas holidays. She did nothing, but she did have her IRB approval. So we were basically trading drafts day by day over the holidays and through January, and she got done, barely. But even then, the only reason she got done is because I had lined up people. There's about a 2-week process by the time you finish. Then this person has to read it, sign off, and this person has to look at, check it. And that normally takes 2 full weeks. And I had all of these people alerted. Dr. Norman helped me with that. So we had all these people alerted, and people handed it off to hand it off to hand it off. And we condensed two weeks into 2 days. And she still barely made it. And if we hadn't done all that, and if we hadn't been able to trade drafts throughout January, she wouldn't have made it. The only reason, even then, was because she had the IRB approval out of the way. And if she had had to wait on her IRB approval, no way would she have made it. She would no longer be working for the university. Now, obviously, that's an extreme case. But I really think it is worth doing the extended prospectus simply because of getting that IRB process in hand and done. Okay, now, you'll see in the prospectus form what you need to do. So if you get that out, I don't have that in front of me. Somebody have that out and open? Somebody got the prospectus form? I got it.
Is it,
Who's got it?
is it this?
That's the prospectus form. It's not on the syllabus, I don't think.
Oh,
That's
oh.
that's the final paper you're looking at.
What's it under, resources or?
It should be under
Supplemental dissertation?
no, it should be a separate block for,
This is what I'm seeing.
In the Dropbox?
yeah, it's in Dropbox.
Okay. Prospectus, under reflections and other topics.
Go to reflections and other topics. All right, and then there should be a separate folder for prospectus, open that.
The prospectus review form.
All right, and then you got directions for the prospectus topic PowerPoint, and the form, and a couple of prospectus exemplars. So does that help?
Yes.
Okay, now, look up what I'm looking at. In particular, there are certain things that I will want you to take a shot at. Remember, first of all, do not freak when you see the exemplars. One is Heidi's and one is Sonia's. Those were their completed, as in 5, 6, 7 drafts or whatever it was. Okay, so that was, and they were working on their dissertations with me. I was their chair. So that was what their prospectus looked like when they got ready for having it signed off. It wasn't what they had produced after one draft of it in this, or at least the first draft of it in this. Okay, so don't freak in that regard. That's kind of like, this is what it might look like by the time I'm through 3 or 4 drafts, okay? All right. Are you glad I said that?
Yes.
Okay.
And I'm still not promising I won't freak, but it's still, I'll try.
Second, first of all, you should probably do some emails with me in terms of your topic. Here's the tendency. People tend to pick a topic, but it's a huge topic. And a topic is not a dissertation. A dissertation has to be an empirical analysis of something. And if it's a quantitative study, you're looking at some relationship between some variables and some outcomes, if it's correlational, or if you're comparing groups, differences between this group and that group, is quasi-experimental or comparative causal, it does something. So, have you narrowed from your giant topic, have you narrowed that down to what you want to do? So you'll need to think about that. If you haven't, maybe just spend some time talking to me. I can help you through that. Because I've talked to a lot of students over the years of trying to help them, asking them questions, getting them to think about, okay, well, that's an interesting topic. What are you going to do with it? Part of that is lit review. Where is the cutting edge right now? How do you find that out? Well, you find a good recent study that's at least somewhat related to what you're doing, and then look at their recommendations for further research. And they will often identify new issues that came up in their study. Maybe one of those becomes your dissertation. And if you find a good recent lit review, almost always will have been written by an expert in the field, you may find a summary of anywhere from 30 to 200 pieces in that field. And by the time you read that good lit review, you should have a real feel for the terrain, what the problems are, what the issues are, what the methodological problems are, what the current, what the most persistent problems that people can't figure out. People, this is too big, but we can nibble on that chunk, we can nibble on this chunk. You can kind of see how the cutting edge saw how and where it's cutting through this terrain and in what directions and why and what little lodestones it's finding on its way through. A good lit review will help you do that. Okay, so then talk to me, and then, at the very least, I'm going to want you to take a shot at your central research question and your empirical study, your empirical research questions, Venn diagram. Here's your central research question. And then your empirical research questions should fit within, be framed by that, but also give specificity to that. So this is larger than this. These are the specifics, these are the empirical pieces that you will actually do. Chapter 3 tells how you're going to do those. But this is what you want to find out. Chapter 4 is what you find out when you do that. This, what do you want to find? Now, I would also like you to at least begin thinking about the problem defined. Read the prospectus form carefully, because I've got some verbiage in there on what the problem defined is. We will spend more time on it next time. Remember, what you're giving us in your oral presentation does not get graded. It is simply feedback by the group and by me, and then you can take the feedback on your oral presentation, not your content chapter, but on your own project, and then your prospectus will not be due until the period after you do your oral presentation on it. So if you're doing your oral presentation, Z and Brant are, you'll get feedback on it, and then you can take that feedback on your oral presentation and incorporate it into what you hand in for your prospectus. Sometimes people really struggle with that, and they have a really minimal oral presentation, and then after they get that, then they do a first draft, a first really rough draft of the prospectus, give it to me and let me give you feedback on that, and then incorporate that plus the oral, and then you have a draft of the prospectus that really begins to make more sense because you've got specific feedback on it. So if you're really struggling to write on that, just hit some of the big points. Now, here's the key on the problem defined. First of all, if you look at the prospectus, there is nothing in the prospectus on introduction or what your topic is about. Do you see that? The first thing on the prospectus is the problem defined. Be careful. Remember how I said sometimes people start writing, and what they're writing is something that needs to go in the dissertation, but it's in the wrong spot? Here's what happens for many of you. Now, think about this and visualize this. The first thing you write on your dissertation, at this point, dissertation far down the line, this is the first thing you've written. The first thing it says is the problem defined. But because it's the first thing you've written, you have this need, which just bubbles out of you, to introduce your topic to the world. So you do that. Well, you need to do that. But that's not called the problem defined. So I end up getting people's introduction instead of the problem defined. So if you need to write some of that to get it out of your system before you get to the problem defined, okay. But if you do, then give it a name. This is my pre-writing introduction, but it's not my problem defined, problem defined. If that helps you label that, do you see what I'm saying? Because sometimes people just can't write about the problem defined until they get some of that introduction out of their system. All right, now the problem defined is this. Assume that you've already finished your dissertation, and you're sending this off to a journal to get published, and it's going to go through blind review. 80% rejection, 20% acceptance. That means 4 out of every 5 manuscripts aren't going to make it. So how do you convince the editor and the blind reviewers that your study needs to be published when all those other 4 out of 5 are getting, sorry. Ooh, kind of like this. You have to convince the editor and the blind reviewers and anybody who reads it that your study is worth publishing. Publishing space is at a premium. How do you do that? That's what the problem defined is. In essence, if you send this off to a journal You're not calling it the problem defined, although you might, but what it really is, it's a rationale. Why is this study needed? What are the weaknesses? What are the issues in your study that people are
The
addressing?
conference is about to end.
Are they telling me I should hurry up? I did send you an email that said we sometimes go over tonight.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that didn't get the message.
They did, didn't they?
So what was your last thing before that?
Weaknesses.
Okay. So this is, the problem defined is really a rationale for why your study is going to be thing. So think of it this way. In the problem defined, think of 3 or 4 issues that are relevant about which more research is needed, and give a citation for why those are needed. And then, after you list those 3 or 4 things, for example, all of the research that's been done to this point has been case study. Somebody needs to do a survey of more representative population. That would be a reason for extending the study. Everybody that's done this so far has only looked at one aspect of the autism spectrum disorder. But there are several stops along the autism spectrum disorder. This study examines another one of those perspectives. You see how each of those, and you can come up with lots, whatever your field is, of things that we don't know or things that are problems or things, remember previous research, recommendations for further research. Somebody needs to, somebody, well, problem defined. Somebody needs to cite Jones in Jones's dissertation about, it indicated that this needs to be studied. This study will, okay, so then you list 3 or 4 of those in the problem defined, and then in the purpose section, then your purpose is, miraculously so, to address those deficits in the field. This study addresses the deficits just enumerated. Now, I'll talk more about that next time in more depth. But that's basically where you're going. Your purpose is to address the issues that you enumerate under the problem defined. And then your purpose really is going to have 2 paragraphs. The first is where you say your purpose is to address the issues just enumerated. All right, now your reader won't remember what those issues, even though you just had a section about it, your reader won't remember that. So if you just said the purpose of this study is to address the issues just enumerated, then the rest of that paragraph should be, if you enumerated 4 of them, a separate sentence. Sentence 1, sentence 2, sentence 3, and sentence 4, where it's a 1-sentence summary of each of the issues you just enumerated. All right, so that's your first paragraph. And then your second paragraph is, thus, this study will do, and what does your study do? And that second paragraph then is a 1-paragraph standalone summary of your study. What it's going to do, and why, and what methods it's going to use to do that. And that second paragraph ends with your central research question. Then segue, the last sentence of that second paragraph is your central research question. The very next thing in your dissertation is research questions.
Okay, so the first paragraph
Under purpose.
Under purpose is 1 sentence to summarize each of the issues.
Well, first of all, you say this study brings together the issues just enumerated.
Okay.
And then what each of those 4 are.
Okay.
So that's a paragraph.
Mm-hmm.
So you tell the reader explicitly, this study is going to bring those issues together. By the way, there might be 15 issues for your topic. You don't want to list all 15.
Right.
You only want to list the 4 that you can address.
Okay.
If
yes.
there's 6 and 7 are there and they're really important, but you can't address them because you don't have access to that, don't list them.
Okay. And then the second paragraph
Is then a 1 paragraph. Thus, this study is, and what it does specifically, and why, and how, which is a summary of the methods, population, research design, analysis, etc. And you say, well, isn't that redundant with the things in chapter 3? Well, yes, it is, but you're only given one sentence about it, or one paragraph about it here. Chapter 3, you're writing a whole chapter on it. Think about that second paragraph in the purpose this way. If your mother were to ask you, Sarah, have you gotten to the point where you can write one paragraph and give it to me and I'll know what you're doing? That's what that paragraph is.
Okay.
And it ends with the central research question.
And it starts with,
It starts with, thus the purpose of the study is to, and why, and then how, which is summary of the method things. That's all kind of laid out there in your perspective.
As long as it's laid out for me, I'm okay.
Okay, then, segue. So that paragraph ends with your central research question. The very next thing is a new level 1 head, research questions. So you remember the Venn diagram here? This paragraph ends in this, and then new level 1 head,
I think we're behind a couple of years.
these. So you see how that leads right to this? So it's a natural segue.
Kids, like,
Does that make sense? Okay, so what would I like you to see? I'd like to see, if you can, I don't know that anybody's far enough along, can you do this one paragraph? That's tough to do this early. If you can, take a shot at it. Certainly take a first shot at these, what those are. If you can think about this point in terms of the problem defined, what your 4 issues are, or 3 issues are, if you can think about that. I know this is forcing you to think about a lot of stuff that you haven't had time to think about. But by forcing you to think about it in a non-graded setting, because it's not going to be graded, then you can get feedback which helps you think about it further as you move toward the first draft of the perspective. Remember, this is only a class. This is early in your program. So what you produce now, you have other classes along the way, and as you have committee members, they might help you think, well, this is what I did way back in my first course in this thing. Does this help at all? Yeah, well, yeah, but what if we do this and this, and you kind of shape it from there. This is a starting point. But it's a tough starting point because at this point, it's all so big and you're all so new to it. That's why I want so I'm not as concerned as you are about your oral presentation as long as you have something for us to talk about to get you feedback, which helps you then get started with something a little more concrete.
Okay.
Okay? And we never did have time to talk about ecstasis. But we will. We'll work that in somehow.
these for all presentations are due.
When we present.
Your oral presentations are due either
Same
June
time we
7th
present.
or June 21st. And the only one of Marshall and Rossman that is due June 7th is whoever has chapter 2, which would be, who has chapter 2? Is that you?
Yes, I have chapter 2.
Yes, I have chapter 2.
I started out writing so many.
So everybody
The
else,
day went on.
anybody except Joanne who has Marshall and Rossman would not be until
I lost
June
it.
21st. All right, now remember, that means that if you're doing your presentation on June 7th, then your draft that I'm going to actually look at is going to be due on June 21st. If you're doing your presentation on June 21st, then your draft will be due after that.
So what's the due date in here of July 5th? Or whatever.
Doesn't it say?
Well, it says prospective draft. That's
Yeah.
something different?
No, that would be for the people who had June 21st.
No, the due date is July 5th or July 19th, it says.
Oh, July 5th, okay, so that means that if you present on June 7th, that
I don't know.
due, it's July 5th, and if you're due on June 21st, it's July 19th.
Okay, so it's not due the next class.
You know, it's due on that next assignment.
Where
And
is
normally it would be the next class, but remember, we had
Right.
to scrunch the
Okay, that's
class.
a little bit better.
Yes, we had
Yeah.
to scrunch the
It's a
class
little
sections
stressful.
together. So the due assignments are spread out through
Right.
July, even though the class assignments are not.
I got you.
Normally, those would be one and the same. But because of But because of the legal thing about getting everything done and getting you an ID by June 30th,
Right.
we had to scrunch that out. That's the reason.
Sarah, where are you seeing, June fifth? Cause on here.
It's
I-
right here, page 12. And like beside it,
Page 12.
July 5th,
Oh, so that's not
It's in
the
parentheses.
assignment and what, okay.
right there where those due
Then
dates
you-
are.
And that's what we're going by, July fifth.
Okay.
Yes, yeah. So normally that would be the
We're gonna
same
be
day
talking.
as
Yeah.
the next thing.
So
But
we have
normally,
the
see,
same
we
phone
wouldn't
number right
have,
here.
we wouldn't have all of our meetings
We
in
gonna be
June.
talking.
That's only because of.
And